So we're going to talk about Judaism, and the discussion begins with ancient Judaism. So there are three periods of ancient Judaism that are significant now and relevant to the establishment of ancient Judaism, which then has a link to modern Judaism. Okay, so you have a period that's called the Exile, okay, and its aftermath or after. And this period is roughly, say, 539 to 333 BCE. And then you have the Hellenistic Kingdoms. And so you may or may not know Hellenistic refers to Greek. So the ancient Greek kingdoms, beginning with Alexander the Great. So that's 333 to 63 BCE. And then, of course, you have the period under the Roman Empire. And this would be from 63 BCE to about 200 CE. All right, so the period of the exile and afterwards. So this is 539 to 333 BCE. So the story of Judaism begins in the late 6th century BCE. Now, at the time, Persia was the dominant empire. So it is in this period that Judaism begins to consolidate as a religion. Okay, so prior to this, you had this very vibrant religious tradition in Israel, and it's about this time you begin to get a religion that we can identifiably call Judaism, when you begin to get the scripture writings come together and other rituals come together. Now, in 586, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians. At least the temple was destroyed. So let's see, Babylonians. Destroy temple. And the elite, so that's the priests and so important families, are all exiled to Babylon. Okay, so this is the period of the exile. Now, in 539, okay, the Persians captured Babylon, and then they controlled the entire Babylonian Empire. And the leader of the Persians, the leader was a man named Cyrus, and he permitted the Jews to return to rebuild their temple. Okay, and so in many Jews returning, the Jerusalem became a temple community. And this is the beginning of a definable religion, which we can call Judaism. Okay, so it's the post-exile. So the period of the exile, you begin to get the consolidation of texts, of traditions, of rituals, and then you have the building of the temple, and these things can come together, and you begin to get this very definable religion that we call Judaism. Now, in this discussion, we want to highlight a couple of things. One is the temple and the synagogue. Okay, so the temple was where the God of the Jews was worshipped, and the Jews who returned from exile believed that there must be only one temple. Okay, and that temple had to be in Jerusalem. Now, what we know from history that there were other temples to the God of Israel, to Yahweh, uh, but the post-exilic Jews believed there had to be one temple. They recognized only one, and that was the temple in Jerusalem. So the temple, what sort of things happened at the temple? It was primarily religious sacrifices. So if you think about this, the religion of the Jews, Judaism, was primarily a religion that centered around the temple, at least at its core, centered around the temple, and was a religion of sacrifices. You would bring your turtle dove or goat or a lamb or a cow, and the priests would perform the ritual and sacrifice it. And then, the family would have a celebration. You would eat the meat, and you give a portion to the priest and to the temple staff. And this went on all day in the temple. Now, you can imagine if you lived abroad, this is very difficult. So, for those not close to Jerusalem, so how would they do this? So of course, the goal was always to go to Jerusalem and offer sacrifice in the temple of Yahweh, because that's where Yahweh lived. But for those who weren't able to do this on a regular basis, or could maybe only do it once in a lifetime, or maybe perhaps never at all, a new form of the religion began to emerge. And it culminated in the setting up of what were called synagogues. And in the synagogues, you'd have prayer, singing, reading, discussion, and teaching. So all very important things, but no sacrifice. That's important. So the only place you could sacrifice to Yahweh was at the temple. So this is unlike many other religions where you could set up a shrine to, or a temple somewhere else, and where there's a population, and offer sacrifices to a god. In the case of the Jews, you could only sacrifice in Jerusalem at the temple. So in the synagogues, I'm just going to shrink this and move this to the side. So in the synagogues, you had procedures that would begin and regulations that began to get written down. Okay, you know, when procedures detailing the rituals, the meanings of different things, the teachings, and they begin to get written in a book. And this book began to create its own center of gravity, right, so to speak. It became an important thing in its own right. Um, and so you begin to get a situation where these rituals and all that's going on in synagogues is in tension, or it's now weighted over against the priests and their rituals. Okay, so you're getting these two centers of gravity now in the religion. So of course the priests and the rituals, the sacrifices to Yahweh in the temple, always are primary. But now you're getting this other form of the religion in synagogues, which also is becoming um, pretty significant. So it is about this time that you begin to get the emergence of the scribe, and their job was to understand and interpret the Torah. And we'll talk about what the Torah is. The Torah is the scriptures of the law of Moses specifically. Okay, so it was their job to understand and interpret the Torah for their audience. And these scholars eventually evolve into the rabbis. Okay, so this is how you begin to get sort of two sets of, or two different tracks of hierarchy. On the one hand, you have the priests, and the priest belonged to a priestly family, right? So there was something genetic about that to become a priest. You had to be part of a priestly family, but the rabbis were a different sort of class of religious leader, and their job was not centered around the temple, but around the synagogues, around the people. Okay, now that's the period of the exile and shortly and thereafter. Now, the next period is the period of the Hellenistic Kingdoms. Now, the Hellenistic Kingdoms would be 333 to 63 BCE, and this is the begins with Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great, of course, is this great general who expands Greek territory, and in so doing, he creates roads, he creates sort of a unified culture, and you get this unified Greek culture that spreads all the way from North Africa to Europe, all the way down to the border of India. So it's a very significant kingdom, and what happens at this point then is you begin to have this spread of Hellenistic culture, and people begin to move around because now you have roads and you have commerce going on, and because you have a unified empire, there's relative safety on these roads, so to speak. Okay, so people moving around, and so you begin to get what's known as the Jewish diaspora. That's Jews who move out into the Greek-speaking areas, and they're often referred to as Hellenistic Jews. Now, so many of these Jews were Greek-speaking, so they grew up speaking Greek, thinking Greek, but they were, of course, Jewish. Now, with the breaking up with Alexander the Great, with his death, the Hellenistic kingdom broke up into, or the Greek Empire broke up into four parts. Okay, and then the part that covered the Babylonian Empire, so one of these parts covered Babylon. The Parthians captured that and took over that. And so the Jewish community in Babylon was cut off from everyone else. So it actually developed its own very unique, different way. Although it was still, in a sense, united with other Jews by use of common scripture and what have you, so on and so forth. But it developed very differently. Okay, so this is with this breaking up of the kingdom into four pieces. There are a lot of things that happen. You get some very important spiritual writings that emerge at this time, and this is about the time when you also get the origins of Hanukkah and other important stories. Okay, so that's another important period. Now let's move to the third one, which would be the Roman Empire. And so this is from 63 BCE to CE 200. So in this period of the Roman Empire, by this time the Jews had been under the rule of foreign leaders for a very long time. There was a brief period of time of self-rule, but that ended. And so you began to get the hope for a Messiah. So that was a king in David's line, or a priest king. So that whole discussion came to the fore. You get a lot of people who would make this claim. And now, For the sake of just in terms of marking important events in ancient Judaism, the most significant thing that happens in this time period is the destruction of the temple. Okay, so how does happen? Well, Judea became more unsettled. The area around Israel became more unsettled. You had constant conflicts between Jews and Greeks and the Romans, and so eventually the people revolted against Rome. And this was in CE 66. And so the Romans came in full force and they crushed the revolt. In the process, they destroyed the temple. Now, so the destruction of the temple happened in CE 70. So this is a very, very important date. Okay, this destruction of the temple was decisive for Judaism. So if you recall, we had said that the temple was central in Judaism. Of course, you had the synagogues, but the temple was central, right? Because that ultimately was where you had to perform sacrifices, and you could actually encounter Yahweh. But with the temple destroyed, then that whole the rituals and priesthood were pretty much done for, because now you had no need for priests, and so that function had pretty much died out. So at the time, then you had different sects in Judaism, and there were a sect known as the Pharisees. Okay, and so there was a man in from this school of the Pharisees known as Yochanan ben Zakkai. So he established a school. The mode of address in this school, the way you addressed the leaders was rabbi, and that became a formal title. And the thrust of this sort of school of thought was Pharisaical. So they were from the school of thought of the Pharisees. And he fixed the religious calendar. So he's taken on very, very significant roles here by fixing, the calendar. For instance, when one should celebrate certain rituals or feasts. And this became very, very important because now you had an authority who was directing the way the religion should play out, because you no longer had the temple or the priests. And eventually this became the dominant form of Judaism. And it's from this Judaism that we have rabbinic Judaism today. So ancient Judaism, when we think about it, was very temple focused. It was focused on sacrificing. Of course, you had the rabbis, you had the synagogues, but ultimately everything was about the temple. After 70 AD, okay, so post 70 AD or CE, everything changes. One other thing I should point out, which will come up later, is there were actually two forms of Judaism that survived. Okay, so we just talked about the Pharisees, which were a sect, and then there was another group that was very, very close to them. They're known as the Nazarenes. Okay, so these are the people who eventually who became identified as Christians. Okay, and then Pharisees are what we identify as Judaism today. So these two religions are really pretty much sister religions or cousin religions, however you want to refer to them. But they're the two branches of Judaism that survived the destruction of the temple. That's because they were not temple dependent. So at this point, these are the three major periods that I think are relevant to ancient Judaism. You have the exile and the post-exilic period, which is the establishment of Judaism as a religion. You have the period of the Greek Hellenistic kingdoms where you have Jews spreading out into the Greek world. And so that changes a lot of the culture of Judaism. You begin to get some more writings, some more sacred writings, and different ways of thinking that contribute to Judaism. And also in this period, you also get some very important stories, like the stories of the Maccabees, from which we get Hanukkah. And then you get the period of Roman rule, and the most significant there is the destruction of the temple in 70 CE.